My name is Navin Fulchand. I'm a nurse and I've been in the health service for about 40, 50 years. I used to be a teacher, I used to be a lecturer. Now I'm a health activist. I want to talk a little bit about the NHS. In fact, I want to go back to the history of the NHS, when it was created, why it was created. So to do that, we need to go back to the 1900s. We have here a multi-colonial empire which controls lots of colonies around the world. But the issue was, in Britain in the 1900s, a lot of men were suffering from what we call poverty and malnutrition, and they were undergrown men. So there was an issue here about what the government would do about it. We have a major colonial power with its own working class people who are suffering from poverty and deprivation. So they had to do something about it. So the state intervened. In 1911, they brought in the Health Insurance Act. So 1911, with the Health Insurance Act, this was mainly to improve people's health, especially men. They had to contribute to insurance and they will get pay when they are off sick. That was one of the issues with the NHS creation. The seed was already laid out in 1911. Now, and we know, suddenly 1914 to 1918, World War I erupted, and that disrupted the flow of the state to actually implement further health improvements. Now, a slight distraction from that, we know 1914 to 1918 there was World War I, and a significant number of Asian and black African Caribbean men helped during the World War I. The idea is to locate BAME, black Asian and minority ethnic people, right at the very outset of the 1900s. So millions of Indian soldiers and 500,000 African Caribbean soldiers helped in the World War I. The problem here is many of them were segregated. Black people were segregated in their camps, Asian people were segregated in their camps, and they were paid less than their white counterparts during the same World War. The idea here is the idea of white supremacy was already well implemented, already cemented during World War I. So that was another sidetrack to the development of the NHS. Now fast forward 1948. Now 5th of July 1948, World War I finished. Again, we had contributions from African Caribbean soldiers during World War II. Again, they were segregated. Again, they were discriminated again. Again, they were paid less than their white counterpart. So we have a situation now where in World War I and World War II, when Britain and Europe was in a very bad state of repair. Basically, there were destruction all over Europe. Enter now the Marshall Plan. This was a help from the United States to help Britain and Europe get back on his feet. Part of that came of the welfare state, and the welfare state, part of welfare state was the development of the NHS. The welfare state had 5 objectives. 1, to tackle the 5 giants. These were the want, idleness, ignorance, squalor, and disease. Now you note, none of these have any relationship with inequality. So the idea of the welfare state and the NHS was not to address any form of equality. So the NHS was created 5th of July 1948. And we had a series of issues that was going on at the same time in 1948. First of all, it was the 1947 Polish Resettlement Act. This was a plan devised by the British government to allow Polish people to stay in Britain. Because Polish people came, some Latvians, some Ukrainian people came around that time, and it estimated about 200,000 people arrived and settled in Britain. The other aspect of that was 1948 Immigration Act for the British Commonwealth citizens. So 1948 British Nationality Act allowed people from India, West Indies, Africa to come and settle in Britain. But it was designed initially for the Commonwealth, the new Commonwealth, which was United States, Canada and Australia, but somehow it extended to the old Commonwealth, which is India, West Indies and parts of Africa. So there's the issue here. The other aspect of that was the Windrush people. Windrush came in June. The Windrush ship landed in Tilbury Docks in 1948. The other one was the independence of India, which was in 1947. That is an issue here where there was partition and many Indian and people came to Britain to settle down and live here. So NHS was created amongst all these activities in 1948. So there was another issue emerge here in terms of the staffing of the NHS. First, there were serious staffing problems in the NHS when it was created. They started to recruit from the Republic of Ireland, but that was not enough. So they recruited from West Indies, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, and any other former colonies. They recruited doctors from India, mainly India and Middle East, and these nurses and doctors were diverted to mental health, learning disability, and elderly care disciplines. So there was already an issue here of how black and Asian and minority ethnic people were directed toward the less prestigious fields of healthcare provision. The other problem was the NHS seriously underestimated the work that was going to happen post 5th of July 1948. Secondly, the Medical Training Institute, they stopped. They got the sums wrong in terms of how many doctors they wanted. And the other one was the poor buildings. So you have three issues here: staffing problems, poor buildings, and an underestimation of people who were in need of health care. So to resolve all that, somebody called Enoch Powell decided to recruit from India, West Indies, and Sri Lanka, Philippines to cover the shortfall. It's not that Enoch Powell suddenly found he fell in love with black and minority ethnic people, but he had a political motive. The motive was to keep costs down, because nurses and medical practitioners were getting organized and were looking for higher pay. So to keep costs down, he recruited people from overseas, meaning India, West Indies, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, etc., etc. So there was another problem. So most of these nurses and doctors were given to mental health, learning disability, and elderly care situations. For nurses, they had a different plan. They recruited many nurses to train them for a 2-year course. That was a 2-year course which leads you to nowhere. It was designed by the institutions to inhibit or prohibit people from overseas to get promotion. The 2-year nurse training was pretty basic. It was known as the bedside nurse. There was no chance of promotion. So white nurses become the managers, the directors, and black and minority ethnic nurses will stay primarily as workers. So that was a design by the NHS. So the idea of that is my view, my analysis, what I've read over the last 30, 40, 50 years, is that institutional racism was already in the NHS well before it was created itself. NHS was already inherently institutional racist when it was formed in the 5th of July 1948. So that's the big picture. Now, as far as my own experience in the NHS, I'll talk a little bit about that. I was recruited in Mauritius to come and nurse in UK. I ended up in a deep rural countryside of Scotland in Ayrshire. It was a deeply conservative area. It was a mining area. It was very poor. There was people who were miners, and most people there worked in the mines. The grandfather worked in the mine, father works in the mine, the son worked in the mine. So it was all very working class people. But the issue here, they knew, the people in that part of Scotland knew they were better than us. They used to refer to us as boys. They used to refer to us as, they can't be very intelligent. They used to refer to us as, what are they doing here? We shouldn't be recruiting. This is a rural part of Scotland. And there was people who were very, very racist. One patient in particular used to call us black bastard every time he used to look after him. He was repeatedly said it. His voice, his tone of voice, his facial expression was full of hatred. That is 1972. Now, how did this man know it was okay to call us black bastard? I mean, has he met any black person before? Did he call them names? But he knew he was going to, who was good to be called these names. Now, and all the other nurses used to laugh at it. They used to think it was funny. They used to, oh, it's a patient, don't worry about it, don't take it personal. We had to just sit there and take the abuse. The other aspect of my own experience is I had more than enough qualification to train as a registered nurse. I had more than a required qualification. And I asked the director of nursing education, I want to change from SEN to registered nurse training. And she said, no. I asked her why. And she said, your qualifications are inferior to the Scottish qualifications. They don't count. So we were stuck with that. So I had to undertake the 2-year training program. And before I left the part of Ayrshire, I had to ask her for my date of completion so I can now apply for more training somewhere else. And I went to her office and said to her, when do I finish my training? And she said, oh, you can finish on so-and-so date in September, but don't get knocked down by a bus, otherwise it will be longer. So which means if I get knocked down and get sick, then I'll finish my training in October rather than September. And in between times, I applied for further training. I wanted to be a registered general nurse. I applied for about 10, 12 training schools to become a registered general nurse. And I didn't get one offer, although I had more than the required qualification. By contrast, I applied to become a registered nurse in mental health. I had 10 offers. So there was another form of discrimination there. So I ended up in Glasgow doing 2.5 years of mental health training. There we had quite a lot of overseas students, Mauritian, Filipinos, West Indians, and what have you. And I hated the place, I hated the training. I left as soon as I was qualified. But in between that, the hospital next 10 miles down the road, general hospitals, had very few black, Asian, minor ethnic doctors or nurses. Their mental health had 50-60% black, minority, ethnic staff. All the consultants were white, and all the junior doctors were Asian or African. After I finished training, I moved to the Midlands to a new psychiatric unit, and there we go again. We had 6 psychiatrists there. 2 of them were Asian and the rest were white, but importantly, 90% of the doctors there were Asian or African or from Middle East. And all the nurses, most of the overseas nurses, got to this charge nurse post and no more. They stopped at the charge nurse post. They were stopped at that level. They could not get into management. Management was not for them, so to speak. Over and above that, 1988 was another example of institutional racism in the NHS. It was the grading structure. The grading structure was implemented to provide nurses with a career ladder so they can move from grade A, B, C, D to grade I, which is the highest grade. And what happened there was absolutely shocking. A lot of Mauritian charge nurses, West Indies charge nurses, Filipino charge nurses got demoted. They did not get ward manager jobs. Most of them were overtaken by white, poorly experienced nurses who they have trained themselves. These people became the managers for the charges who trained them. So it was quite overt. It was a national outcry about it. But the institution carried on doing the same thing. The grading structure was supposed to provide a career ladder, but in terms of black Asian minority ethnic people, it did nothing of this sort. It was quite a discriminatory practice. I was lucky. I managed to get a degree in between times, and I moved to nurse education to another part of the Midlands.